Ecclesiastes chapter 4. Ecclesiastes chapter 4. Everybody should have a handout like this. If you don't have one of these, you can raise your hand real high, and Quillen will find you. He will bring you a handout. So raise your hand up real high if you need a handout, and they will come to you. Otherwise, turn with me to Ecclesiastes chapter 4. Solomon, in chapter 4, we started it last week. Solomon is getting into this observation, this period of his life where he's remembering the issue that he toiled with, that he wrestled with at that point in his life was his relationship to his work and how humanity approaches work. And we spent some time last week covering that first passage. This week, we're going to look at 3 verses 4, 5, and 6. And here Solomon makes 3 observations about negative approaches to work. So negative ways that we as mankind approach work. And he calls them vanities. That each of these approaches to work, each of these issues regarding work and how we work is a vanity. It's a waste of our time. And each of the verses points out a different issue, a different negative aspect of how humanity approaches their work. And I remember when I was a little kid, or not when I was a little kid, when my boys were very little, rather. So when I was a bit of a younger man, and I was new to pastoring, and I was getting ready to go out for an event. I was going to go do some pastor job. I don't even remember what I was going to, but my boys were much smaller. And as I was rushing out the door to go to work that day, one of my boys looked at me and said, "Daddy, why do you have to go to work today? Like, do you have to?" And I just took that moment and I stopped and I said, "Yes, I do have to." He's like, "Why? Why do you have to go today?" And I stopped and said, "Bud, do you want to eat? Do you like your house? Do you like the things that you have?" "Yeah." "I have to work. If you want to eat, I have to work. There's a reason I go to work every day." And I wanted to make that connection, and I pressed a little hard, and I poked fun at him a little bit, but I was like, "Hey, do you understand there's a reason why I work?" And I wanted to press that home because I want my boys to understand the reason behind the things that we do as men. Men and ladies both work, but why do we work? And I want my boys to grow up to be men who value work and have a healthy relationship with work. And so I wanted to make that connection early on in their life. There's a reason for my work that I do. And I want to ask you guys that question tonight. Why do you go to work? What? Yeah, Nat's like, "Praise God, I'm done." Nat, you can leave, actually. You're not helpful for this. Why do you do the labor you do, even if you're not punching a clock? What gets you out of bed in the morning? Why do you work on the things that you work on? What drives you in your labor, in your work? For those of you who have a career still, why? What's the motivation? Because Solomon, in this very first verse, Solomon is going to press in on our motivations. What drives us? You're going to see he makes this observation of this negative motivation that we have toward work, that humanity has. And he observes this, and then he looks at 2 different unhealthy approaches to work. And so look at these verses with me here for a couple moments. Look at what he says in verse 4. But I want you to have that question in the back of your mind. Why do I work? Why do I do the things that I do? What drives me? What's my motivation? So if we get our motivation wrong, then my friends, we can miss out on a whole aspect of life that the Lord has for us. Look at what he says in verse 4. He says, "Then I saw all the toil and all skill in work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. This also is vanity and striving after wind. The fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh." So this is where he's making an observation about a negative approach to work. So the fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. Now, if you notice, he's just gone from making this general observation about work motives to now he's making a proverbial statement. So Solomon can't help himself. He's the Proverbs writer, so he's break it into a proverb here. The fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. Basically, he's saying the fool sits back and does nothing and destroys his own life. Verse 6, better is a handful, another proverb, better is a handful of quietness than 2 hands full of toil and a striving after the wind. So I want to break this down one verse at a time. Here's the observation about a negative motivation. He says, then I saw the toil and all skill and work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. Solomon says here that there's a wrong way to approach our work. There's a wrong way to use our skill and our efforts and our toil. And he says that so much of our time as people, both men and women, so much of our time is spent just trying to keep up with the Joneses. That we're envious of what the people around us have. That we're envious about what, if you're a leader in your organization, you're looking at other similar organizations and you're comparing yourself to them and you're trying to keep your organization up with them. As an individual, you're trying to keep up with your literal neighbors, keep your lawn as nice as them, keep your cars as nice, and you're in this race. And he says that so much of the work that we do, the toil we spend, is just to keep up with our neighbor because we envy them. My friends, there's a wrong reason for working. There's probably many wrong reasons. This is one of them that Solomon observes. That we as people can oftentimes work for the wrong reasons. See, your energy should be spent out of a passion for the mission rather than an envy of man. That when you are simply working because you're envious of what other people around you have and you just want that, then you are working for the wrong reasons. So we ought to labor because we believe in what we're laboring toward. The goal for us, and you've probably heard it several different ways throughout your life, but you'll hear people say that if you find something you love to do, you'll never work a day in your life. You've heard that before, something similar to that. What that's really getting at is this, the motivation, that if you believe in what you're doing, if you believe in what your labor is going toward, then your work is far more worth it. We ought to put our labor and our toil behind something we believe in. We're passionate about the mission. We believe in what we're trying to accomplish rather than simply trying to keep up with everybody around us. So the problem with this, if you allow envy or jealousy to be your motivation for your labor and for your toil, for your career, for your work, the problem with that is jealousy as a motivator is a constantly moving target. And what I mean by that is, as soon as you have a car better than your neighbor's, you're going to look across the street and see an even better car. As soon as you achieve whatever it is you think that now you finally arrived, the reality in life is you're going to start your eyes are going to open to a whole nother level to whatever that is, whether it be a certain number in your bank account, certain car that you're driving, certain set of clothing you want to wear. You can buy as many flannels as you want. You're going to realize, I have more. I'm sorry. There's just nothing you can do. Be as envious as you want. I'm invested in this thing. I'm way ahead of you. If your jealousy is your motivator, your envy, if that's what's motivating you, you're never going to be satisfied. It's constantly moving. Why is this an unhealthy reason to work? Because there's always someone with more. Always. You look at even the richest people in the world, they're not satisfied. They're looking at the other super rich people in the world. And there's this envy of one another. And my friends, we got to be real careful about this in the church. This convicted me as a pastor. It's so easy to look around at other churches and be like, boy, we don't have everything Green Tree has. I'm friends with the Green Tree pastors. I make fun of them all the time for being awesome at everything. It's like, come on, leave something for the rest of us. Well, there's great churches all around. And it's so easy to look around and say, boy, I wish our building was like that. Boy, I wish our parking lots were just the stupid things that we think about. Isn't it so easy for that to sink into our hearts as people? For us as the church, for us as individuals, for us as families. There's always another organization that's bigger, better, that looks more beautiful. Their stuff is more polished, more put together, more organized. There's always somebody ahead of you, always. So if envy is your motivation, then when Solomon says here that it's a chasing after the wind, a striving after the wind, that's because you can never catch the wind. It's literally as useless. Trying to keep up with your neighbor is as useless as trying to catch the wind. You cannot do it, and you'll always be running. So what drives you in your job? What drives you in your career? What gets you out of bed in the morning? I think it's a fair question for us to ask ourselves. Solomon's asking that question. And there's a couple negative approaches to work. He talks about two totally opposite sides of the spectrum here. So he immediately moves in verse 5 to this proverbial statement that he's writing. And many commentators would say that they believe this is a common phrase of his day, that he's writing something that whoever he's writing to would be familiar with, that the fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. Now, we don't have proverbs like that today. That sounds like a terrible proverb. But what he's saying is that the lazy man, the fool is lazy and doesn't work, and it ruins his own life. His own laziness ruins his life. He eats his own flesh. He has no food. He refuses to even get up to feed himself, so he eats his own flesh. Do you see what Solomon's saying here? The fool does that. Folds his hands, refuses to work, and eats himself. Does sound very foolish to me. See, there's one negative aspect to work or approach to work is to simply refuse to work at all. It's not healthy for us to not work. It's not healthy for us to sit around and do nothing all day. And there are people in life who really struggle with laziness. And let me just say this about laziness as a whole. Laziness burns bridges rather than lifting a finger to build them. See, laziness, if you allow laziness to come into your heart, if you allow laziness to come into your life, you will burn so many relational bridges in your life. So rather than getting up and doing some work to build bridges, you will actively burn them all down. And I've seen this in so many different ways in people's lives. I've seen adult children mooch on their parents for years and years and years and not care one bit that mom and dad are slaving away, working hard, while they sit at home and receive all the benefits until well into adulthood. It's a selfishness. This aspect, this type of laziness that is invading our culture, I see it all the time. I mean, peers of mine, people who are my age, I see it, and it drives me crazy. See, this type of laziness, it burns bridges because it takes without giving anything in return. This type of laziness, the folding of the hands, the sitting back, not helping out, not doing anything. It just takes and takes and takes. And when you take from people in your life and you never contribute anything in return, you are ruining that relationship. It's not really a relationship at all. Folks like that, they take until they destroy every relationship in their life. And the thing about it is, they don't even care. They move on to the next until they can milk everything out of that next relationship. I see it all the time. Sometimes addiction is involved. Sometimes it's immaturity. There's all sorts of different things that go into that, but the reality is there's a heavy amount of laziness and selfishness. This type of laziness, it takes without any consideration of those who are giving. It just wants more. It's insatiable. That's why it burns bridges, because eventually it isolates everybody out of their lives, and then they're forced to go find new people to mooch off of, to take advantage of, and to do nothing to help. It burns bridges. We also see that laziness hurts the individual more than it helps them. So the individuals, and what Solomon is observing here is the fool folds his hands. So the fool is lazy. The fool does nothing. But what happens as a result? He eats his own flesh. What's Solomon observing there? That it destroys his own life. That this type of laziness hurts the person who is lazy. They're selfish in their motivation, right? They're looking out for themselves alone, but their selfish motivation actually ruins their own life. Isn't that interesting? Their selfishness leads them to destruction. Their thinking about themselves alone only comes to hurt them. Why? Because work is good for us. Work is valuable. God has crafted us and created us to work, to help our brothers and sisters, to labor together, to build things, to be a part of things. God has created us to work. And my friends, I've said this before, and I just want to remind you again, we'll have a job assigned to us in the new heaven and new earth. When we rule and reign with Christ for all eternity, He has a job for us. If you don't like working now, you're really going to hate heaven. He's got a job for you. Learn to work now. This is practice for eternity. Work is good for us. Work gives us purpose. Work builds strength and confidence. One of the greatest things my dad did for me is make me work as a young man. I always had a job. My dad always had something for me to do. We started cleaning church when I was 5 years old. So when I was 5 years old, my family started cleaning the church. I had a little Sunday school room, and I had to vacuum, put up the chairs, and I took out all the trash in the building. That was my job. I was supposed to dust the windowsills in the sanctuary, and I never did, and Dad got really mad at me. I remember that specifically. I hated doing it for some reason. And the flies that were dead in the church windows were the biggest flies I've ever seen in my entire life. I don't know what it is about church windowsills, but they get flies they've got to be an inch long. And they're not horse flies. I don't know what it was. But they scared me, and I didn't want to touch them. But I had a job. I had something to do. And he had me helping him at the car dealership when I was 8 years old. For a time when I was 8, I had 2 jobs. I cleaned church, and I cleaned floors with him at the car dealership. And I'm telling you, I was money bags. I had money all the time. So I was working hard. I was so proud of myself for working. As a young man, I just had pride in myself. And when we deprive ourselves of working, of laboring with the people around us, we're hurting our own self-confidence and our self-worth, because there's a part of us that the Lord has created to do things in this world. And I just want to challenge you guys, change your, even the way you look at work. It's a gift. The boss that you work, Micah, listen to this, the boss that you work for, they're a gift in your life. Your coworkers, the things that you're doing, it's a gift. God has put you in that place for a reason. And the labor you're doing, the work that you're doing, no matter how monotonous it may seem, it's an offering before the Lord. And I think that we even need to just change the way we look at work. It's not something we're trying to get away from. I believe it's something we ought to embrace in a healthy way and utilize it as an offering before the Lord. He gives it to us for a reason. It gives us purpose. It's good for us. It makes us, I spelled strength wrong in your handout, sorry about that. And it gives us confidence. I just saw that right now. Darn it. Throw them away after this. Man, sometimes we're not good at our work, We try our best. The team told me the other day my tombstone's going to just say, bless his heart. He tried, Last thing, verse 6. So he goes from laziness to the opposite side of the spectrum. Look what he says here. Better is a handful of quietness than 2 hands full of toil and striving after the wind. Now what's Solomon saying? said it's better to have a little peace and quiet in life than it is to work your life away. We must have balance in this. My friends, balance in all things. Work is healthy. Work is good. Embrace your work. But my friends, work in and of itself is not the goal. It's a means to the end. It's not the end. And it must be brought into your life in a healthy, balanced way. So one of the unhealthy ways that we approach work is that we fail to find any working balance at all. So one side is we fail to work. The other side is we fail to find balance in life. Now, let me say this, that if you aren't settled on what you're working toward, then you won't ever know when to stop. Why do you work? I asked you that in the beginning. Why do you labor? Why are you doing all of the things you're doing in your life? Some of us bring in so many things into our lives, so many different activities, so many different things that it's actually taking away from the very things we're trying to accomplish. I want to say that again. Some of us bring in so many activities, so much work, so many things that it keeps us from appropriately accomplishing the very goal we're setting out to accomplish. You want to raise a healthy family. You want to raise strong kids who know Jesus. You want time with your kids. But you pack your life so full of things that you have no time for your family or your kids. Why? We want to be strong leaders in the church. We want our family to be plugged into the church. We want to be active in the community of Christ, but we pack our lives with so many things that we can't be a part of the body of Christ or active in our community groups the way that we want to. Why? If you're not settled on your mission, on your purpose, if you're not very clear about that in your own life, you're not going to know when to call it quits and say, I've had enough. I need to take away things. I need to clock out and go home. What's the motivation? When you're clear about that in your heart, and when you're clear about that as a family, when you know what you're working toward as a family, it simplifies everything in your life. You'll know when you're working too much because you're sacrificing the main thing. You'll know when you have too many things in your life because you're sacrificing the goals that you've set your sights on. Do you see what I'm saying? It simplifies things. And we tend to make ourselves so busy, become workaholics, whatever it might be. Might be a plethora of activities that we just have overfilled our lives with. Maybe you're just one job, but you're there so much that it's actually hurting your relationship with your spouse and your kids. What's the whole reason you work in the first place? To give a good life to your spouse and your kids. And if your work is hurting your relationship with your spouse and your kids, then I have to ask you, why? Why are you working? Why are you working that job? Why are you working so much? Make a change in your life so that you properly fulfill the mission you're working toward. I just think we get so focused on the wrong things. Here's what I would say, and I believe Solomon is saying this. It's better to have less things, less power, fewer toys, less money, smaller house. It's better to have less, to change your lifestyle, and enjoy your labor, to be able to just enjoy the work that you're doing, to have a healthy balance. It's better to make those sacrifices and enjoy the balance in your life. I think that is such a better, more Christ-honoring way than laying your family at the altar of work and hoping they turn out okay. I don't think that's what Jesus calls us to do. He gifts us for things, and I'm so thankful for that. And I believe in working very hard. I like working. I like being here. I like doing things. But the reason I work, aside from glorifying God, is to provide for my wife and my children. my wife and my kids win. So that means there are things at the church that I just won't be a part of. That means that there are sometimes hospital visits that I won't go on. Why? Because I haven't seen my kids all week. And kids win. You know, there's limits for all of us. And I don't feel bad about that. And I don't think that you should either. It's important to have less and enjoy some peace rather than have more and be miserable. It's better to have less and have some peace than have more stuff and be miserable. Solomon says, have a handful of quietness is better than 2 handfuls of work. He's on to something, my friends. So tonight, I want to invite the worship team to come forward. We're just going to take some time with the Lord because you might be conflicted or convicted, rather, in a couple different dimensions of this. You know, maybe the Lord's bringing some conviction into your life because you feel like, boy, I've been lazy. I've taken advantage of people in my life. I don't know. Maybe you're feeling that way. The Lord's just bringing some conviction in your life that it's time for you to step up and take on the challenge that the Lord has before you and begin using your energy to glorify Him and to provide for yourself. Maybe that's an area where you are. Or maybe the Lord's bringing some conviction into your life because you've packed your life so full that it's actually hurting the mission. That some things need to come off of your plate. And you just simply have to have less. You have to set your sights a little bit lower so that you can properly fulfill the mission for this season and this time. Whatever it might be, what I want to encourage you to do is take this time as we worship Jesus. And if you need to move around, if you need to fill this altar space, if you need to get alone in the overflow, you need to find a place all by yourself, I want to encourage you to do that.